Good afternoon. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're looking at price elasticity of demand, particularly how that impacts total revenue and hence business decisions. Should they raise prices or should they lower prices? So let's cut to the chase. Price elasticity of demand and total revenue. Well, we know that total revenue, TR, is equal to price, P, times quantity, Q. So if I go into a shop and I purchase 10 Mars bars at 50 pence each, so we'd have 50 here, 10 here, then the total revenue, the TR, would of course be £5 for the retailer. Now, interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever looked at and considered the labels on your diagram? Look, here we have quantity, here we have price. Wow! In our total revenue equation, here we have price, here we have quantity. So it would seem that these two things show the identical relationship between price, quantity, and revenue. And indeed, that is the case. So I could, for example, illustrate this diagrammatically by adding 50 here and a quantity of 10. And interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, that means that this area here, the shaded area, is the area of total revenue. So when we're drawing our demand curve, one of the things that we can glean from, that we can deduce from the demand curve, is that the area beneath any of these points represents the total revenue. Now that's very important, so keep that in your mind as we move on to discuss the next point. Let me just move you along with me here. Join me in an empty school and an empty classroom. So the PED values are now something that we need to consider because, of course, that's what I asked you to interpret for your homework. So the first thing to say about the values are that they're always negative. And they're always negative due to this inverse relationship between price and quantity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean this. If we refer back to our demand curve here, which you can't quite see, there we go, we can see that if price falls, quantity demanded goes up. So I'm not going to get into the price elasticity of demand equation here, but basically we'd be dividing a negative by a positive or a positive by a negative, and we'll always get a negative outcome. So price falls, quantity increases, or price rises, quantity decreases. So you're always going to have negatives and positives, and as a consequence of that, the value of PED is always negative. And if the PED value is greater than 1, then we say it's elastic, in other words, very sensitive, so demand will be very sensitive to a price change. If it's less than 1, it means it's inelastic or insensitive, so demand is insensitive to a price change. Or equal to 1, which is a unitary, it's a special case, and we'll not say anything more about unitary at the moment. We don't need to get into that at this point. So for your homework, I had asked you to consider two values. One was minus 1.4 and one was minus 0.4. Now, the thing that you've got to get into your head is that although we say that these are always negative values, which they will be, when you're interpreting them, i.e. whenever you're working out, well, is it elastic or is it inelastic or is it unitary, we pretend the minus sign's not there, ladies and gents. So I'm looking at that and all I'm seeing is 1.4. I'm not seeing the minus sign. I'm looking at this and all I'm seeing is 0.4. I'm not seeing the minus sign. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, where does 1.4 fit in this table? This being the table. Well, 1.4 fits in there because it's greater than 1. So that value is elastic, and 0.4 fits in there, so that value is inelastic. So as a consequence of that, we can then make a couple of very important deductions and maybe recommendations to a businessman or woman who runs their own business. And let's now consider that. So that's the final point I want to consider. These are the revenue implications, ladies and gentlemen. So in the first instance, I have drawn an elastic demand curve because I know that 1.4 is elastic. So it's a very flat curve, and it's one whereby very small changes in price bring about very large changes in quantity demanded. So quantity demanded is very, very sensitive. Small change in price, large change in quantity demanded. And as you can see here, small change in price, large change in quantity demanded. Now the interesting thing to note here, ladies and gentlemen, is with regard to the revenue. So at P1, the revenue is P1Q1, so it's that rectangle. At P2, the revenue is P2Q2, so it's that much bigger rectangle. And whenever the price is lowered from P1 to P2, what happens is P1Q1 is that, but we're going to reduce the price to P2. So we're going to lose, or the businessman, woman, is going to lose that area. So it's a loss of revenue. But this white shaded area, this white area here, this was already part of P1Q1 anyway, so we're not gaining anything there. But this big rectangle here, this is all gain. And so the gain is bigger than loss. And the gain of what? The gain of revenue. So the gain here is greater than the loss. And so as a consequence, in this instance, it's most worthwhile for the businessman or woman to lower their price, because as a consequence of them lowering their price, they will see demand expanding massively. Remember, ladies and gents, that movement along the demand curve, we call that an expansion. So demand expands significantly, and consequently their total revenue goes up, even though they've lowered their price. Let's now consider inelastic demand. So inelastic demand, as you will know, and as I'm sure you can see here, this means that demand does not really change, i.e. is very insensitive to changes in price. And in this example, I've increased price from P1 to P2, very substantially, large change in price, small change in quantity. And quantity demand has only dropped off a little. And again, let's think about the revenue, areas of revenue. So at P1, the area of revenue is that rectangle. At P2, the area of revenue is that big rectangle. So in price rises, this little slither here at the end is lost. This area here was already part of the original revenue at P1, so we're not gaining anything there. But this area here, this is all new revenue. This is area of gain. And so the gain is much bigger than the loss. And so in this instance, again, revenue would increase. So if the demand is inelastic, it makes much more sense to increase price, because you're not going to lose many customers. You're charging them more, and obviously you're going to earn more revenue. So that really is, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what else to say apart from, if this is the first time you've watched one of my videos, please consider subscribing, hit the notifications bell, and subscribe on all other channels, Twitter, the Gram, etc. Bye for now. Good afternoon.